Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Checking In with Tommy Else. I am your host, who else but Tommy Else. And joining us today is a dear friend of mine. I've known her for well over a decade. I met her uh, as a personal training client and continues to be to this day. But we also became quick friends with one another, and she's been a great friend to me, to my family, and is someone I am very appreciative to have in my life. Uh, she is going through chemotherapy right now. She was diagnosed with cancer back in either late November, early December, and so she is in a situation where she already has a weakened immune system. She's in the age group that's considered to be at risk as well. So she's kind of got two things going against her there. And so I thought it would be good to check in with her, see how she's doing, and then kind of get an idea of how she's coping with it, how she's dealing with it, and get her thoughts on the situation in general. So, without further ado, it's my honor and privilege to introduce you to Miss Sharrann Simmons.
All right, I am here with Sharrann Simmons, who, despite the background, is coming to us from Chicago. Sharrann, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah, and you are in Paris, I take it?
Excuse me?
You're in Paris, I take it?
Yes, you see the Eiffel Tower right behind me. I'm having
Yeah.
a glass of French wine too.
Oh, well, that's good. So I wanted to have you on the show because you are in a unique position that you are as of this past December, you started going under chemotherapy treatments.
Right. I was diagnosed with endometrial cancer, and after some surgeries, I started chemo. And chemo is challenging in itself, as most people realize, but you don't really understand it until you go through it.
Right.
So it really affects your whole body and your energy level and everything. And your immune system is very compromised the entire time you're going through chemo.
So you especially need to be in quarantine and kept out of the general public, right?
Oh yeah, I've basically been in quarantine since February, since
Yeah.
before our idiot president, put the put the global pandemic out. So my oncologist would prefer I saw no people except my dog and never ventured out of the house. But I do go out periodically for groceries, etc.
And you're wearing a face mask and the gloves.
Oh
and all
yeah,
that
I've been
stuff.
wearing a face
Yeah.
mask since February. And I'll even go up to people in a grocery store or a drugstore and challenge them if they aren't wearing a mask, because it's really more dangerous for me if other people don't wear a mask. And that's true of everyone. When you wear a mask, you're protecting any germs you might pass on from going out to other people.
Right. And how have you been dealing with being home so much?
Well, I'm single and I've been single for a long time, so I'm used to being by myself and I enjoy alone time. But at some point, it just gets to be old. And the worst part of it is the uncertainty, not knowing when it's going to end.
Right.
In some regards, I'm now sort of semi-retired. I do a little bit of consulting, but I really feel sorry for like kids in college that want to graduate and find a job, or people that are dependent on work and have been laid off and have no income. So I'm in a fairly okay situation, but it's just the uncertainty of not knowing when it's going to end, and also trying to be so extra careful of germs and anything else because of my chemo.
Right. And how have you been feeling health wise since like February, January, February?
Well, it depends. I go for chemo, and that's something else was surprising. You think, well, it may be an hour or two. No, it's like 5 hours. So
Right.
you normally are going to get anti-nausea drugs plus the chemo drugs. I'm on two different ones. That's very common. And then I get chemo once every 3 weeks. So chemo week is a bit of a lost 5, 7 days. But after the first couple treatments, you sort of figure out things and you listen more closely to the doctors and the nurses about what works and what doesn't work in terms of side effects. I've had really nothing typical. I've had joint pain and bone pain, which is not that common, but is really associated with the chemo drugs. And then what your body does is try to build up the blood cells that have been killed off with the chemo along with the cancer cells. And so after 3 or 4 treatments, it takes longer to build up to a point where you're strong enough to go through the next chemo treatment. So
Right.
I've had to delay my last two because my blood results weren't good enough, which is really depressing because that just stretches the whole thing out further.
Right. But you're down to your last one coming up, and then
Yeah. In fact, I had a
yeah,
blood test this morning, and the numbers look really good.
good.
So I'm set for my last chemo next Tuesday. And the best part of that is between 10 and 15 days after your last treatment, your hair starts to grow back.
Yeah.
Although, since all the beauty shops are closed and everything else, the wig program is not such a bad alternative.
I thought you were going to say that the best part was that in 15 days you could start working out with your trainer again.
Oh, no, no, no. The doctor might have to let me rest up for a long time. I don't know.
Oh, I don't know. Well, I might have to
Things
speak
that,
with him.
with chemo, you have no energy, and also, um, your muscle mass turns to, mush.
Right.
It's surprising because I haven't really worked out seriously for 5 or 6 months now, and um, I can really tell my body's changing. So we have to start doing something, but it'll take time for the drugs to get out of my body. It's surprising.
Yeah, no, you got to go through a healing process for sure before you start trying to do anything. I know, but so one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about is a lot of people who are in isolation right now who do live alone. There's people who have pets, which you do. Benji, which is our favorite little dog, and that's got to be a big help to have that companionship around the house. I mean, tell me about what it's. I mean, does it help? What's it like having Benji around?
Oh, it makes a huge difference. In fact, it would be a lot harder, not so much the quarantine, but the whole cancer chemo thing without Benji. At first, the first month in particular, I just stayed in bed. I went from the bed to the couch to the bed, and Benji was at my side continually.
Yeah,
And he never has been bad about going in the house, but he, will go for hours and days sometimes until someone walks him. And I have great neighbors and friends, and you, who come over and help with him. But he's wonderful, and he knows something's up. He knows something's wrong because I'm
yeah,
doing things that I don't normally do, and we don't go out as much. We don't go on long walks. So he knows something's wrong, but he can't really tell what's wrong. So, but he's really, there he goes. He's really been a great pal and really helpful in many, many ways. And he's a good watchdog too. He's very protective of me. So I never worry about anyone coming in or any problem because Benji will let me know long before they get in the door.
yeah. Um, how has it been with? I mean, you like you said, you've got people who are helping with taking care of him. You said you have gone to the store. Are you going out when just? Do you have people helping you get groceries, or are you just doing all the shopping yourself?
I'm doing most of it myself. I probably go grocery shopping, grocery drugstore once every 2 weeks.
Yeah,
Um, I do a lot of stuff online between Amazon Prime and Amazon Fresh, which is the Whole Foods link up. The little Amazon van comes to my house at least once a day, sometimes twice a day. So that is really helpful. It's amazing the number of things you can do online in terms of just everyday stuff. In fact, this wig, Amazon Prime.
yeah. Well, that's pretty good. You're able to find it online and it fits and it works and everything. It looks
Yeah.
good. Yeah, but, just speaking of Benji, I mean, when I've taken him for walks, and I know other people have had the same issue, it seems like since you started going through all this stuff, he will only walk so far when we take him for a walk, and then he stops, and then he wants to turn around and come back, which is one of two things, or maybe a combination of both. One is he's lazy, but the other being I get the feeling he doesn't want to be away from you very long. It's like he really just doesn't want to get too far away. And one time he even got off the leash with me and just raced back to the house, waiting at the door to be with you. I mean, it's gotta feel good to feel loved, right?
Well, it is. He's always been really attached to me. He bonded to me really. He's a rescue dog, and really quickly after I first got him, he bonded with me. But now that I've been sick, he's gone to the next extreme. And even at home, he'll follow me from room to room. I was in the bathtub last week, and he tried to jump in the bathtub because he thought, I don't know, I was drowning or something. So he's really crazy, and you're not the only one. Two other friends of mine have walked him, and he's pulled back after, a very short walk, or he's gotten out of his harness and ran back home. So yeah, it's nice, but I always worry that, he's getting too attached.
Yeah. So how have you been spending your days in
Well,
quarantine? What do you do? Give me a typical day. I know you've been working on a few things.
yeah, one of the side effects of chemo is many people have trouble sleeping, and I've had trouble sleeping. So I try to sleep a regular schedule, but it doesn't work out that way. So I'm a news junkie, and I watch lots of news, real news like CNN and MSNBC, as opposed to some other news. So I am watching carefully this whole COVID-19 mess. And as of today, it's 1.2 million Americans have this awful virus, and over 70,000 have died. It's mind-boggling that 70,000 Americans have died. And it's sort of scary when I sit here thinking, oh my gosh, when they show the commercials around people that have compromised immune systems, I go, oh, that's me.
Yeah,
So it's
very
even
much so.
really makes you think about what you do, and how you act, and how many times you wash your hands. So it's
Well, you've been
scary.
you've been you've been making masks too.
Yeah. I'm active in my Methodist church, and my church ladies have done a lot of different things for different groups when there's a different need. We'll do baby blankets, we'll do prayer shawls, we'll do all sorts of things. And so I've got a group of them making masks, which is a pretty easy sewing task, really. So we've been doing that. And I've also had, surprisingly, a lot of my friends send me masks because they understand that I'm supposed to be wearing one all the time.
Right.
So I have quite a wig wardrobe right now, but I probably have even more of a mask collection.
Yeah.
My roommate from grad school, from college, just sent me 10 Purdue masks, which are really great.
Oh, nice.
I
Nice.
wore one to this morning, actually.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into some stuff here. I know you'll want to talk about. So you've been at home. like you said, you're pretty steady on the news. I don't know that I've ever gone to your house and the news hasn't been on TV. So, how do you let's just take this one question at a time here, okay? How do you feel the state has handled the coronavirus up till now?
The state of Illinois?
The state of Illinois.
State?
Just the state of Illinois.
I think Illinois has done probably a B plus. Pritzker has been very engaged early on, and I think has done a lot of the right things. I think the stay-at-home program is the way to go. I think the governor of Georgia, besides being an idiot, is just crazy, and I'm worried that there's going to be a huge uptick in cases down there. So this idea of opening up, I think, is a problem. But I think Illinois has done, a pretty good job. And also, in terms of PPE, I don't know how they did it, but through some connections, they had a plane come directly from Korea and another Asia location into Midway Airport just to bring supplies and equipment into Illinois. So they really aren't trying to depend on the federal government. They're trying to be very self-sufficient. And also there's been nursing home outbreaks in Illinois like in other states, but I think Illinois has dealt with it in a better way. And there's quite a few new regulations they put in place right away to cover some of the nursing home issues.
So would you think it's better to wait until we have an actual vaccine before we start letting everyone off the leash again? Or just to wait, or is it enough to wait until the numbers come down?
Well, I think surprisingly, the suggestion from the government around, waiting 14 days of numbers declining, I think certain things can start. For example, there's already outside construction in Illinois, and that seems to be a reasonable thing to do, as opposed to going to a tattoo parlor or getting your nails done. I would love to have my nails done. My nails have never been naked like they are now, but those kind of one-on-one touchy-feeling things, that's just really stupid, I think. No matter how clean you try to keep your establishment, having the public come in, and even gyms, which was part of the Georgia opening, I think there's so many risks there. So I think it needs to be done in phases and very slowly. I think we will have a vaccine, probably not this year, but probably early in 2021. So it's not the end of the world to wait 6 more months. And they just bumped up the estimates today. So now they're thinking it could be well over 100,000 US people could be dead, and that's not an exaggeration, and that's probably a conservative estimate. And that's assuming we keep things under control and 6 feet away. But I've been surprised the number of times I've gone to the grocery store or the drugstore, and people will be there not wearing a mask or standing 2 feet behind me, and I always say something which sometimes doesn't work so well, but it's such a risk. So everybody's got to be committed to this. Otherwise, it's just going to be more dead people.
Yeah. And so the follow-up question, of course, then, that's a pretty good review for the state. What about the good old federal government? How do you think they've been handling this whole thing?
I think if they would do nothing, it would have been better than what they've done. This idea of saying, we aren't order clerks, let the governors do it, it's the governor's job. Excuse me, that's what there was a whole, department created, not only under Obama, but way back under Bush 1, to deal with, pandemics like this. And there's been so much work done historically that has been just tossed aside in the current administration. So it's just another failure in a long list of failures, but unfortunately, this one people have died from. So the idea that there's no, organized system to buy supplies or to coordinate states because the virus doesn't know where the state line is. So if you
Right.
have some crazy rule in Georgia and you live in Alabama, you're going to get sick. The same would apply to us in Illinois or Wisconsin or Indiana. So that's something else I think Pritzker's done a good job. There's been a sort of a consortium on the East Coast with New York, New Jersey, Connecticut governors, and then the Midwest with Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. So I think, and the West Coast too, people are trying on their own to do, but if it was coordinated at the federal level, it'd be so much more efficient and so much more effective, and it's just not. So it's just one more thing. I mean, we've been lucky with Trump up to now. There's not been a major war or some other problem, but this pandemic, I think it really points out and illuminates the deficiencies of anybody in office. It's like this hot water test. You know, when you're under stress and there's a problem, you really see if somebody is up to the job or not.
Right. Good answer. And what do you think about the people who feel like their freedoms are being infringed upon by being told to stay at home?
I think these people are crazy, and I think wearing a Confederate flag and an Uzi and trying to go into the Michigan state capitol is just crazy. But those are the people that have been wound up by Trump. So if you have a country that's very divided and that someone has fanned any racist tendency in some folks, then you can be expected to have things like this happen. So everybody is free to do whatever they want, but you're not free to do something that's going to hurt somebody else. That's why we have laws. That's why we have speed limits. That's why we have rules in school about getting kids vaccinated. So there's things that you need to do to not hurt your neighbor or your fellow countrymen. And these folks that I've seen demonstrating, number one, they aren't that organized and they don't really understand what they're doing. And the risks they're taking to themselves and others are so huge. I do think another wave is going to happen of this virus this fall. And I think some states are going to be so totally unprepared. And the faster they open up tattoo parlors and other things, I think the worse it could be.
So do you see this? Okay, so we're in early May right now. Where do you think we'll be, say, August 1st, if you had a guess? Do you think we'll be, but do you think we'll be better or do you think we'll be worse?
Well, we haven't seen any evidence yet of this virus sort of, going underground in hot summer months. If you look at Spain and also some Latin American countries where it's really hot, you haven't seen any let up. So I don't expect that the summer months are going to help us, but I think August might not be too much different from May or June. I think the problem is in September. If people try to open schools, if we try to go back to what people will perceive as a normal situation, I think that's when all hell's going to break loose. So I think we might get through summer, but I'm worried about fall.
The thing is I agree, and that I think that this is still, I think we have a long road still ahead of us.
Oh yeah.
We'll come out the other end eventually. I have no doubt. But I mean, I think the road is longer than people want to accept. And like when they announced, that the stay at home was getting pushed to May 31st, and everyone got all upset, I'm like, it's gonna be way past May.
Right.
Like, don't think like that's the last time they're gonna push this thing up. When they announced the very first 2 weeks of this thing, they said, well, just, the next 2 weeks, we're going to have a stay-at-home thing. I knew there was no way that after only 2 weeks, they were going to be like, all right, we're good. Let's go back to normal. I knew they were going to extend it.
Oh, yeah.
And it keeps getting extended, and it keeps getting extended. So, like, for me, I'm not even putting my finger on a date at this point. I'm going one day at a time, see where things go. We end up where we end up. Now, I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I have the luxury of still being able to stay at home, be able to work, So for me, it's way easier to just sit this thing out and, wait till it runs its course. So I understand there's a lot of people out there who are suffering and who are dealing with financial issues and home issues and issues with their spouses and all that stuff. So I get why a lot of people are anxious, but I think that we also, with that, you can ease some of that anxiety by trying to accept a bigger view of what we are looking at. Um, so let me ask you, what would you say has been for you personally the hardest part of this entire pandemic? And that's I know that's tough because you're also dealing with a lowered immune system. You're going through chemo. I mean, like you're even if the world was bright as rain, you'd be going through a difficult time right now anyway. How would you say that the pandemic has made this possibly more difficult, or what's been the most difficult part of this for you?
Well, even without the chemo, I know it's hard to believe, but I'm slightly over 60, so I'm still in a compromised class. So if you factor in my age and the chemo, it just makes it more scary. So
Sure.
that if
Yeah.
I would get sick, it would be much more serious illness. That's
Absolutely.
been
Yeah.
tough. And I don't dwell on that fact, but I haven't been sleeping well. And I have to believe not sleeping is because I'm internally very anxious about getting really sicker than I am now.
Sure.
But then on the other side of the coin, I really miss having my nails done. I really do.
Yeah.
I miss going out to lunch with friends. I miss having groups. I'm unfortunately right now the president of two pretty large women's organizations, and we haven't met with either one of those groups on a regular basis since February.
Yeah.
And one of the state conventions planned for October has already been canceled.
Yeah.
So that's looking pretty far down the road. So I think until we get some therapy, some drug, and probably more than we currently are working on, that will either prevent or really address the severity of the disease, or a vaccine, or until we get 60% of Americans have this and we get a herd effect, I think we're all going to be very much living in this kind of life, isolated and 6 feet away and no large gatherings. To be honest, today, I can't imagine going somewhere with 10 other people. It would
Yeah.
be scary to go because the thing with this virus, you don't know if somebody is shedding and carrying the virus and they have no side effects. So they might not know themselves and feel they're perfectly healthy, but they could really infect a lot of people.
Absolutely. And that's again, like when I hear about events that are in like October or even later being canceled, that's all I need to hear to know that they're not expecting this to be, and even if the stay at home thing comes up, I feel like the stay at home, once they do start lifting it, it's going to have to be done gradually, just as much as it was when we went into it. It was, well, first it's going to be, like you can only have so many people in one place. Then they'll like ease up a little bit on that, and then maybe eventually the mask can go or whatever. But it's not going to be just like a one day, okay, everybody's back off the leash and back to normal. And I do think that this is just the way life is going to be for a while, and we're just gonna. I think like I said, I think that the quicker we can just accept that and start trying to adapt to it, the easier it'll be for everybody involved. And if everybody just does their part, we can get through this a lot quicker and easier.
But
Uh,
also, the economic burden of modifying a restaurant to hold 25% of the, past customers, just doing that, making the modifications is a big burden, and the restaurants already has no income coming in, or to modify a stadium to move the seats further apart. Or like the airline industry, they're trying to say, okay, we're going to leave the middle seat empty, but still you're a lot closer than 6 feet. So making any of these modifications is going to be really expensive. So coming out of this is going to take longer and be more expensive than going into it, because it was easy to say, okay, stay home and don't do what you normally do. So I think we've got a long road ahead of us. And like I said, you and I are pretty lucky that we can stay home and it's sort of a nice atmosphere. But if you had two or three kids and both spouses lost their jobs, it must be terrible and
Right.
terribly anxious and scary about the whole uncertainty. So I think that's the worst thing about this is the uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen next, how long this is going to take, and also the uncertainty of there might be enough dumb people in this country to elect Trump again. And then just think what a mess that would be. Sorry.
So one last question here for you. If you had to put your finger on something you would consider to be, say, a silver lining, something positive that you've seen come from the coronavirus, what would you say that is?
Well, I think one thing, and I guess for me it's a combined being sick plus the virus. So many people that I knew, as I would probably call acquaintances, not
Yeah.
that well. I mean, I knew them by name and to say hi, hello on the street or something, but so many people that I just knew very briefly have brought me food, have come over and walked Benji, have sent me emails and cards. And so the outpouring of the community around me, I guess it was always there, but I maybe didn't know it or didn't realize
Yeah.
the support system that was there that I wasn't using. So when I needed it, I was really gratified and thrilled that I had all this support around me. And our neighbors on the cul-de-sac where I live, it's like a little UN. We have Egyptians, we have Iranians, we have Indians, and all these people have made me the best food. So it's another silver lining. I've, eaten better now in the last 6 months than I have the past 2 years, probably.
Well, that's great. That's a good answer. I'm glad that you're feeling the love from everybody, and I know everybody loves you. And, but it's nice when you see it in action. So
Right.
that's great. Well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate you being here and sharing your side of things. When we get a little further down the road, I'd like to check back in with you and see how you are then versus this conversation we had today. So
Like a plan. I like it.
it sounds like Benji is chasing
Yeah,
someone off.
playing watchdog. Thank you.
Well, all right. Well, thanks for coming on the show and take care of yourself and be well. Okay.
Okay, bye.
All right. Bye.
All right. So that was my interview with Sharrann Simmons. She is not in France, so although I'm sure she'd like to be. I appreciate her coming on and being candid about her situation with her cancer diagnosis and her feelings on government and the and it's nice to hear that of all the things that have come of this for her, that realizing what a community she has around her of people who love her, um, that's a great realization to have, that that when things get heavy and things get serious and you really do need help, that you've got people there for you. And I'm not surprised at all. She's a great person and she's there for everybody else, so she definitely deserves it. She's certainly a case of good karma, because she's put a lot of great karma out there for everybody else, and me and my brother and my grandmother when she was alive. An incredible help with her, so she deserves to have all the love and help that she's getting. So again, I thank you, Sharrann, for being on the show. Thank you to everybody who watched. If you have any questions or comments, you can tweet at me at Tommy_else. And until next time, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, tell somebody you love them, and until next time, peace and love.